right, so ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dan Hughes. I'm the former webinar trainer from Nik Software. I was the webinar trainer from 2009 to basically 2014. And since then, I've started teaching at the Rochester Institute of Technology. I teach photography in the photographic science department. And I'm in Rochester, New York right now, actually in the basement of my friend's studio, print studio. And we're in his scanning suite, which he's let me use for conducting these webinars because I don't have a decent spot at my house to conduct these kinds of webinars. Leo, you said you can't see the screen. You shouldn't be able to see me. You should just be able to see the screen. And if you can't see the Nik Software screen, here I'll again switch over to the webinars. Log out of the webinar and log back in. It should fix you right up. If not, we might have a different problem, and I actually don't know how to solve that one. All right, so it's a minute or two after 11:30. This webinar is being recorded, so if you've got to skip out or if you want to watch it over again, you can totally do that. It's going to be emailed out, I think, tomorrow at some point. I probably think it's like 24 hours after the webinar actually finishes. You'll get an email with all of that. Now, if you do have any questions, feel free to type them into the questions box there in your GoToWebinar control panel. I've actually hidden that control panel for now. I will sort of go back to it every once in a while. If there are questions that I can answer quickly and sort of they're pertinent to whatever we're talking about at the time, I'll just answer them now, or at the time. If not, what we'll do is I'll save them till the end. We'll have 15, 20 minutes or however much time we need to answer any questions that you might have. So I'm on the DxO Nik Software website right now. There's a few things that I just want to mention right off the bat, and that's like the deal of the month, the launch deal for purchasing the software. If you don't already have it, there is a trial that you can download, and it's a full featured unlocked trial. So definitely give that a try, especially after the webinar. If you haven't already used the software, check out the trial, and then you can get basically it's $50 off until the end of June to purchase the software if you don't already have it. And the webinars, you found this webinar, so I'm assuming you either got an email about the webinars, saw this little pop-up when visiting the Nik Software website, or you somehow found the webinar page. And these webinars, I think, are posted until June, the end of June, yep. But Joseph Lanashki and I will be conducting webinars into July and August, and hopefully indefinitely, because it's a lot of fun, and I love sharing this stuff. And I'm sure Joseph does as well. He puts on a great show. So I'm gonna minimize the website for now. I'll try and answer any questions that are in regards to your software whenever we possibly can. I'm going to be launching the software primarily from Photoshop today, and then we'll also take a look at launching the software from PhotoLab 2, because when you buy the Nik Collection now, you actually get PhotoLab 2 Essentials included. And PhotoLab 2 Essentials is a raw processing software. It's actually a fully functional organizational and post-processing tool. I'll show you that. It comes with the Nik Collection at this point. It's wonderful, and I want to talk about why it's kind of wonderful when we get to that point. For now, though, I'm in Photoshop. I want to walk us through utilizing the Nik Collection. I'm just going to open up the control panel to make sure that everything's good. Looks like it. Okay. So nobody's having any problems. Perfect. So I've opened into Photoshop. I just realized that my Nik selective tool didn't pop up automatically. I must have closed it when I was using the Nik or the Photoshop interface last time. And there are two ways to access the software. One is the Nik selective tool. I'll show you how to get to that if it's not popping up in your Photoshop screen. And then also, if you go to the filter drop-down menu and go to the Nik collection, you'll find the entire Nik suite populated there under the filter collection. Now, if you're a Lightroom user, what you would do is in your Lightroom catalog, in the develop module, there's actually a few different ways of accessing the Nik collection. The easiest way that I can think of is if you right-click on the image while you're in Lightroom, go to Edit In. If you have the Nik collection installed into Lightroom, the collection should show up there, except for HDRFX Pro. That actually shows up in an export dialog. So you would right-click, you'd go to Export, and then you'd find the HDRFX Pro 2. We can talk about that later on as well. For now, let's go find the Nik selected tool because it's not populating on my screen here. I'm going to go up to the File drop-down menu, down to Automate, and then click on the Nik Collection Selective tool. And what this does, as I click on it, is it pops up this handy-dandy Nik selective tool so we can access all of the plugins from this floating palette. I tend to leave this open because I'm using the Nik collection as much as I do. So this is actually just usually open on my screen and ready to go so that I can access Viveza or Color Effects or Silver or whatever tool we want to be using. Now, jumping right into Viveza 2. I want to talk about the interface. We'll talk about how it works here in Photoshop. I'm going to expand out the interface. In fact, the first time you open the software, it's going to look probably exactly like this. You can do two things. You can either hit the green button in the upper left corner if you're on a Mac, or the expand button if you're on a PC. And what I will do typically is I'll just move this into the upper left corner, expand the window out to go full screen here, and then I actually shouldn't have to adjust that anymore. It should just open full screen just like this. It's a handy little tool. Now, Viveza 2 is a piece of software for controlling light and color. There are global adjustments, which means we would affect the entire photo as we make adjustments, maybe with the tools palette on the right side right now. You can see if you follow my cursor on the right side, it says global. And then we can also do selective adjustments using control points. It's a really powerful tool here. I'm actually finding myself using Viveza 2 less and using the control points that are built into PhotoLab 2 more. And I'll talk about why that is later, but if you're a Photoshop user or a Lightroom user, you're probably going to want to stick with Viveza 2 here, unless you want the other capabilities of PhotoLab. Again, I'll get into that later, not this time, or not at this time. So we've got our photo, we're open into Viveza 2. We've got a little bit of metadata in the lower left corner. You can actually see the file that I'm using is a little bit small. It's the only version of this image that I have, but I think this is an effective photo for describing what Viveza 2 does. And if you follow me to the right side of the interface, your interface might actually launch this way. So you'll have brightness, contrast, saturation, and the structure sliders on the right side here. If you want to expand to all of your tool set, you can actually click on the expand button or just tap E on your keyboard, and that's going to expand so that you've got beyond structure, you've got shadow adjustments, warmth, red, green, blue, hue. And these are some of the key tools built into this software. You have, of course, all of your contrast adjustments, but then you have these really highly malleable color controls, again, both globally and selectively. Now, what do I mean by global? When I say global, what I mean is that if I adjust one of these sliders, it's going to affect the entire image. So if I take the contrast slider and slide it to the right, it's adjusting the whole photo. If I take my shadow adjustment slider, slide that to the left, it's going to be darkening down any of the things that the software finds to be a shadow. So that would be basically, if we looked at this histogram down here, the histogram, the stuff on the right is going to be the very brightest values. The stuff on the left, obviously the darkest values, the shadows, and then the shadow adjustment slider is going to affect the stuff more so on the left side of that histogram. So if we adjust this to the right or to the left, we can basically control the density, the brightness of the stuff that's dark, the shadows. And then I like what's happening here with these two simple global adjustments, contrast and shadow adjustments. Let's just take a quick look at the before and after. If you follow my cursor into the upper left corner and we click this preview checkbox off, you see the before. Click the preview checkbox back on and we'll see the after. In fact, just to go through this, I'm going to increase structure overall in the image. I'm just going to bump the saturation way up so that we can see some pretty major changes. Following me back over to the left side of the interface, we have three different views that we can work with. We have a split preview, which cuts the image down the middle. On the left is the original, on the right is the enhanced. You can actually click on that little red line, drag that back and forth. All three of these previews are built into the entire Nik suite. So once you become comfortable with one of these interfaces, you're going to be able to navigate all of them pretty well. Obviously, Viveza 2 is designed for adjusting light and color specifically on a color image. And the control points become really important in that regard as well, because we can go in and adjust individual values of different portions of the photo. I clicked on the side-by-side preview, and so what this is showing us is on top of is the original, and on the bottom is the enhanced photo. In between the two images, you have a twirler, which basically makes it so that on the left you have the original, and on the right you have the enhanced image. It's just 3 different ways of viewing the work that you've been doing on your image. Moving over to the right upper corner, we've got a couple tools built in here. You've got your sort of like your select tool. It's basically the standard tool that your cursor is always going to be on by default. You have a hand tool or pan tool, so if you're zoomed in, you can actually pan around the image. And then we have a zoom in and a zoom out functionality as well. And so that's actually a little bit different than some of the other plugins in that the zoom functionality is slightly different in some of the tools. This one's relatively straightforward though, so I'll kind of leave it at that. Now, getting back into the tools palette on the right side, I'm going to go ahead and double click on each of my sliders. That's going to home the slider, gets it back to its original default. And the reason I'm going to do this is because I really only want to adjust this image selectively. Maybe we'll adjust those shadow adjustments. I kind of like what's happening with that down about -40 or so. And selective adjustments using control points are exceedingly quick and easy. All I have to do to basically draw the attention of the viewer around the image is place points on the objects that we want to adjust and then control them. As opposed to if I was within another piece of software, I might need to make a complex selection. And to do that, like in the water here, and to really sort of bring out the texture in the water and the color in here, and then the affect the sand in a similar but different fashion, that would be a lot of work. And we'd have to create these really complex masks to be able to do that. With Viveza 2, all you have to do is click the Add Control Point button on the right side, and then literally just click and drop the point on the object that you want to adjust. From here, the control point makes a selection of the object that you place the point on, and it's going to be making a selection of the similar tone, color, and texture, basically, of the object that you placed the point on. Note how there's a circle that's going around the control point. We're not making a circular selection here. We're making a selection inside of the circle of the object. So if I go to brightness or contrast or adjust saturation or structure, what should happen is we're really only going to be affecting that rock and anything that the control point thinks is similar to that rock. And so right now, if I go and I really adjust this and darken it down, maybe add a little bit of structure, which is going to be this really wonderful texture adjustment, and add a little bit of contrast, what you can see is that the reflection in front of the rock is going to be affected, and then a little bit in this area is going to be affected. In fact, to kind of check the work, what I want to do is move over to the right side of the interface where it says control points. And if I click the, hopefully you can see this, it's pretty small in the interface. If I click the little checkbox that's to the left of control point 1 in our control point list, we'll be able to see a before and an after, right? And so what that point is doing is it's making the adjustments that we've adjusted in the sliders, and it's trying to make a really smart photographic looking selection based upon the point that we dropped the control point on. What it's not doing very well is it is affecting some areas that I don't want, in that I don't want this control point to really be affecting into the sand all that much. So what we're going to do is take another control point. So I click the Add Control Point button on the right side, place the point in the sand here in the foreground, and watch what happens as soon as I drop this point. You see how that brightened back up? Here, I'll delete this point in case the latency in the webinar is affecting what you're seeing. I'm going to delete this point by just tapping the delete key on my keyboard. You see it darken back down, and that's because this point is affecting that area. What I'm going to do is just drop the control point in here, and it goes and cleans up that selection. Basically, the more control points you add to the image, the smarter, if you will, each individual control point gets. And that's because what's happening as you drop more and more control points, maybe as I warm up the sand a little bit, add a little bit of yellow by reducing some blue. I'll talk about what I'm doing here in a second as well. Um, what I'm doing is adding more control points is each control point communicates with one another, and it says, okay, this control point is on the rock. It looks like this, and so it selects that. And then it informs the rock control point that there's another point here. And as we add more and more, basically each one gets smarter. In fact, just to sort of illustrate that one more time, if we move back over into the control point list on the right side, and I click on the checkbox that's on the far right side of the control point list, what you're seeing here is the selection that's being made by, in this case, control point number 1. Anything that's white is going to be affected by that control point. Anything that's stark black, like this area where this point is not going to be affected by the control point. And anything that has a gray tone to it is the adjustments that we are making with that control point is going to affect these areas a little bit, right? So you can see that it's a little bit white here, and then there's a kind of a gradient as we move out. Watch what happens if I take this control point and I start moving it around. You can see the selection basically changing on the fly, right? And the idea of these control points aren't necessarily to make the most perfect selection as we know it in terms of cutting something out, but rather to make a selection that's going to look photographic. And so as we make these adjustments, it's going to look clean. It's going to look correct. Now, as I was saying that stuff, what I'm doing is I'm actually duplicating this first control point and I'm placing it in the rest of these areas around the sand. And so now you can see I've warmed up the sand nicely. To duplicate a control point, I'm just holding the Option key that's on a Mac or an Alt if you're on PC. And as you hold Option and click on the control point, you can drag away a duplicate. So hold Option, click on the control point you want to duplicate, and just drag it away. That's going to make a duplicate control point. So now I have 5 control points in the sand that are doing a nice job to kind of just warm up the sand a little bit. I think we're going to come back to those in a minute and kind of finagle them a bit more. The next thing we're going to do, though, to kind of control the viewer's attention in the water is to add a little more texture and saturation back into the water. So we do this by starting out just adding a control point. So I click the Add Control Point button on the right side, place the point in the on the object, in this case in the water. I'm going to increase the saturation some. I'm also going to take this structure slider and I'm going to start to bring out some of the texture in the water. If I add a lot, I'm going to get a ton of texture in that water. This is 100% structure. You can see that the left side of the image looks completely different than the right side. In this case, I don't think that that is appropriate photographically. I just want to add a little bit of texture in there. I'm going to take the shadow adjustments down. And then, of course, we can adjust the warmth, the red, the green, and the blue very quickly and easily. In fact, I'm going to add maybe 5 to 10% blue in the water just to create a color separation from the foreground, which we're going to have warm, the middle ground, which will have blue, cool, and a little darker. It's going to recede photographically in the background. And then up here in the sky, I'm going to kind of leave this misty effect, although maybe we can darken down the corners a little bit. So let's say I really like the effect of this control point. I want to do the same thing over on the right side and in the middle. Again, we duplicate the control point. I tend to like the Option, click, and drag sort of control. There is another option though. If you click on the control point that you want to duplicate, and then you tap Command C on your keyboard, you can then hit Command V. You get the little crosshair for a new control point, and now when I place this point, it's going to be a duplicate of whatever the control point was that I duplicated, basically. So nice and simple and easy. I like what I've got now. Let's take a quick look at the before and after using the preview checkbox in the upper left corner. But we've basically transformed this relatively flat, linear looking image into something that has some form and depth to it. I want to take it one step further. I want to warm up and add a little bit more texture to the sand. We can do this by clicking on each individual control point, right, and controlling them separately, or we can actually group these control points together. So any adjustment we make to the group is going to affect all of those points. To do that here in Viveza 2, you have to know the shortcuts. And so within the entire Nik suite, there's a series of shortcuts that you can use. I've used a couple of them already, the Option, click, and drag to duplicate, the Command Copy, Command V, Command, copy paste shortcut is a nice one. To group these points together, I first need to highlight all of the points that I want in my group. There are two ways to do this. I'm going to do it one way now. We're going to do it another way later. If I hold the Shift key down on my keyboard and I click on each of the control points that I want to include in my group, it's going to highlight each one of them. And then if I hit Command G on my Mac keyboard, Control G if I'm on a PC, it's going to group those points together. And now any adjustment I make to this one control point, it's going to adjust all 5 of these points that we've added in. So I'm going to add a little bit of structure. You can see as it sort of snaps to as I add that texture in. I'm going to go ahead and push the warmth a little bit further, and I'm going to actually reduce the blue a little bit more. And what the heck, let's go into the red and add just a little, or green, and add a little bit of magenta. So one of the beauties of having those RGB controls, red, green, and blue controls, is it means I can individually and independently control each aspect of the color of the image. And so if there's anyone out there who worked with a color darkroom back in the day, or maybe still are working in a color darkroom, you get those similar kinds of controls. It's a red controls, red and cyan. So if I add red, I'm going to get red. If I remove red, I'm going to be removing red and adding cyan. Going into green, green is going to adjust magenta and green. So if I add green, it's, we get this sort of nuclear green looking beach. Actually, the selection is pretty good. If I go and reduce that, if I bring the green down into the negative, we're adding magenta. In fact, I'm going to leave that, how about 0? And then the blue adjustment, if I add blue, right, we get this nice blue control. If I reduce blue, what we're doing is removing blue and adding yellow. And so, once you get those kinds of color controls down, you can go in and adjust any of these aspects quickly and easily and with the utmost control of the individual color channels. Now, I think I've talked enough about this image. We're going on, almost half an hour. We've introduced the interface pretty much and then adjusted the photo, but I like what we've got so far. Right, if I click on the split preview, we take one more quick look at the before and after. Here's our original image. We've completely transformed this photograph into something totally different than what it was initially. For better or for worse. I like our adjustments here, but I bet you we could probably make them a little more subtle and get a nice, really beautiful photo out of it. We're all done editing though. And when we're done editing and processing the image, we move into the lower right corner of the interface, click the OK button, and that's going to bring us back over into our home interface, in this case, Adobe Photoshop. And in Photoshop, what's happening is we're dealing with layers. It's one of the reasons why I like using the Nik Collection with Photoshop is the fact that I have layers, and then I can adjust the blending mode of that layer. I've got layer masks. We've got all of the different blending options and controls that you've got within Photoshop. In this case, in this workflow, I don't think we would need that. Here's the before and here's the after, but it is a nice added capability to be able to deal with layers and layer masks and blending modes and so on and so forth when using the Nik Collection. All right, so that's our first image. Let's go ahead and transition into the second photo. Here we've got a whole other image that we can sort of massage and adjust to direct the viewer's attention through the image, right? We've got this beautiful landscape photo of a bridge. I don't remember the bridge. 99% sure it's in Italy. And this is a John Barclay photograph who lent us the image to be able to display and use Viveza 2 on. Now, before I jump into Viveza 2, I'm just going to check the GoToWebinar control panel, make sure we're good to go. We don't have any questions or anything. Fabian, you said it's in your hometown. Fabian, what is, where, if you don't mind saying, what is the hometown there? Very cool, by the way. Florence, oh, well, that makes sense. Yeah, very cool. Thanks for letting me know. I feel like I should have known that. I should have just mentioned it, and I either completely forgot or just didn't know. So Lauren, you're saying, are the algorithms in Viveza 2 enhanced over Viveza 1? Absolutely. The control points are going to be a lot stronger, a lot smarter than Viveza 1. And then also there are some controls that were added in Viveza 2 that were not within Viveza 1. I'm pretty sure, and Viveza 1 was out in like 2009 and before that, so I don't remember all of the details, but Viveza 1, I believe, had brightness, contrast, saturation, and then red, green, and blue. And I think that the additional tools that are in Viveza 2 are the structure tool, which is like texture, shadow adjustments, and then the control points, the U-point technology itself is a newer, sort of more powerful or smarter form of the U-point technology. Good question. All right, let's transport ourselves to Florence, Italy, and open up Viveza 2 here. So we've got this nice, beautiful kind of sunset image right now, but in terms of me as the viewer, I don't know where I should be looking, right? There's a lot going on in here, and what I want to do is direct the viewer's attention around the photograph, and we're going to do this by controlling the contrast, the color, and the relative brightness levels to sort of direct the viewer's attention. Now we've got these really nice, interesting shapes occurring in the image where, you know, you've got like the archway of the bridge itself. We've got our the water in the river and the reflections that are occurring because of that. We've got the blue and the bluish green of the shutters and so on. And what I want to do is sort of separate these things and direct the attention towards the middle of the image and in what I say sort of like a circular motion or fashion. And so I want to subdue the things I don't want you to look at so much, and I want to bring out the things that I want you to spend time looking at. And to do that selectively is going to be the fastest and easiest way, I would say. And what I'm going to do is sort of lean back in my chair, assess the image, and figure that like this area here in the top of the image, where the sun is striking this wall here directly, I want to dumb that down. I want to darken it down because I don't want your eye to be distracted by that area all that much. So I'm going to place the point on the object, size the area so that I'm basically just encompassing that object. If I make it too small and I start adjusting this, let's say with the brightness, it might become noticeable. It's not bad with this image. If I bring it way down, it becomes very noticeable. But watch what happens if I expand this out to encompass the entire wall. It makes a much smarter, better selection of that entire area. And so I can go into that brightness value there. I can darken that down, in this case, about 30%. I'm also going to desaturate it just a little bit because if it's darker, I'm going to expect that it's going to be a little less saturated because those highlights are going to have a lot of color and tone in them, especially with direct sunlight striking on them. And as I darken it down, it subdues the area nicely. From there, I want to do the same thing in the lower left corner. I kind of want to distract your eye away from this. Although the texture in the bridge is really beautiful, I'm going to place this point down here in the bridge. I'm going to darken those values down just a little bit, desaturate just a little bit as well. That's going to pull your eye away from that area, and it's going to push the eyes, or your attention as the viewer, in towards the middle a little bit. In fact, let's darken that maybe to 15% or so. Note this, as you place your control points, I'm pretty confident where I'm placing these control points, what it's going to do. But what you can do is kind of experiment a little bit. Drop the point, make the adjustments you think you want, and then click on the control point and move it around the different areas. Because if I place the point in the very bright value there, that's going to make a different selection than if I place the point in maybe this slightly darker value here. It's going to make a completely different selection if I drag it up into the shadows, right? It's going to look totally different because now that control point is going to basically say, I want to look for those tones, colors, and textures as opposed to these brighter values. So place the point where you think it should be, and then don't hesitate to just pick it up and move it around so that you can make sure you're getting the effect and the control that you want. If you're still not sure about exactly where the point is and exactly what the control area is going to be affecting, you can always move into the control point list on the right side. And like I said before, if you click on the little checkbox that's on the right side of the control points list, it's going to show you the selection that you're making. So right now, this control point is affecting a lot of areas that maybe I don't want it to. But if we come back to this control point later, after we've placed several more control points, what we'll find is that this point is much more refined in terms of the selection that it's doing and making. So let's do this. The next thing I want to do to really direct your attention is to emphasize colors in some of the buildings and sort of desaturate color in other buildings. So some of these buildings have more or less paint on them, and I'm going to sort of exaggerate that a little bit. So I'll drop a point on this area that's a little bit desaturated. I'm going to remove more of that saturation. And what we're going to do is create a kind of checkerboarding effect on the image. And this checkerboard effect, using color in this case, by desaturating this area and saturating this area, and then desaturating the next one, is it's going to yield us sort of more depth and form overall. So I've added my saturation into this building, desaturated it from that one. I'm going to duplicate this point right here, Option, click and drag, place it right here. There, it's desaturated that one. I'm going to duplicate this point, and then I'm going to place it in our saturated building. And then I'm going to go ahead and take our desaturated one. And this checkerboarding effect, this works, it's a very common technique when you're able to control lighting, like in portraiture or in studio lighting. You're going to see this kind of checkerboarding occurring. It's a very common tactic for controlling the viewer's attention in the image, because what it does is it separates these objects from each other, and it makes it seem like there's more fidelity. It makes it seem like you're actually there. It makes it seem like there's tone and texture differences. And it's a really straightforward way to kind of control the viewer's attention through the image, right? So let's just look at the before and after now, because we've made some dramatic changes, but it doesn't really look like it. So if we check the preview checkbox on and off, here's the original image. We're getting there. Or this was the original photo, so we will get there. And then here's the enhanced photo, right? So I'm starting to distract you from the things that I don't want you to look at, and then I'm beginning to emphasize the things that I do want you to look at. Let's add a little bit more contrast. You know, let's see what happens if we drop a control point on the shutters here, and then let's increase that saturation again. And then let's add a little bit of green, and then add a little bit of blue. And now those shutters start to really pop off of that yellow background, just with that one control point. Now to keep our boat on the road, if you will, keep moving along, I'm gonna drop some control points into these areas that I wanna sort of distract you from. And in this case, I'm actually adding some texture into the bridge here. I'm going to drop a control point in the lower right corner, and we're going to darken down that corner. Let's actually drop a control point in this highlight area, because now that we've made all of these adjustments, this looks a little bit out of control. I'm going to increase saturation in this case. I'm going to darken it down maybe 5 points. Very subtle little burn there. And then add a touch of contrast as well. Now, one of the tricks to this is to emphasize the things that you want the viewers to look at, and to de-emphasize the things that you don't want the viewers to look at. So the quickest and easiest way to do that is to darken the stuff you don't want the viewer to look at, and to brighten the stuff, at least the general rule of thumb is that. I can't say that for every single image, because it's completely image dependent. But if we click on a side-by-side preview now, and we take a look at that before and after, we've made some subtle adjustments, right? But if you lean back in your chair here and you look at the before on the left and the after on the right, again, each of those effects is pretty subtle, but I think your eye is going to be attracted more towards that right side image, right? Because we're really directing the viewer's attention. All subtle adjustments, but it makes it seem like we haven't done a thing, right? So we're almost like hiding the fact that we're controlling this image to the nth degree. We're all done editing this photo. Oh, we should go back to control point number 3, right? Because we didn't look at the selection again, but I bet you when we click on it, yeah, now we're really only selecting out that portion of the bridge, because each of these other control points is smartening up the rest of our selections, really honing it in. We're all done editing, so I'm going to click the OK button in the lower right corner. Brings us back over into Photoshop, and in Photoshop we have our layers. So before and after. All right, so I'm just going to revert back to my GoToWebinar control panel. Everybody seems like they're good to go. Let's see. All right. So Juris, I see your question there. I'm going to save that to the end of the webinar, if that's okay. We've got just one more landscape image. I realized when I was logging into the webinar that I had basically 3 landscape images that I'm starting with. So when we're jumping over, we will jump over into PhotoLab 2. We're going to start with at least one portrait image. I didn't vary these all that much. And I kind of wish I had now that I've logged in and started talking about this stuff. So jumping into Viveza 2, we're going to make this one much faster, right? And the reason why I want to make it much faster is because the normal workflow for this sort of thing is to open up your image into Viveza 2, look at the photo and assess the photo, and figure out what you want to emphasize and what you want to dull down and how you want to direct the viewer's attention. In this case, we've got an image that has this big fluffy cloud in the upper right corner, and then we have an in focus bit of hay in the lower left corner. And so these are kind of like opposing forces, upper right, lower left, right? Same kind of thing is happening here. We've got sort of the lines that are directing the viewer's attention towards the middle in the lower right corner. Same thing happening in the upper left corner. So to direct the viewer's attention, I want to control those aspects in relation to each other, meaning lower left and upper right kind of adjusting in relation to each other, and then lower right and upper left and adjusting those things in relation to each other. And that hopefully should start to direct the viewer's attention towards the center and in a circular manner and in a way that you cannot look away, right? If my intention is to make this photo and print it, or make this photo and it's supposed to be an advertisement, or it's supposed to be just a stunning image, I want you to be sucked in. I don't want you to be able to look away, so I don't want to give you any exit points. I want you to just look around the image continuously forever, right? So I don't have any global adjustments that I want to make in this case, although we haven't talked about the levels and curves tool. So why don't we just jump down into the right side of the interface where in the levels and curves tool, you have an RGB option where you'll be affecting all 3 of the channels at once, the red, the green, and the blue individual color channels. So you can actually go in and make a curves adjustment or a levels adjustment that's going to be a global control here within Viveza 2. I'm actually just going to increase the highlights just a touch with a levels adjustment. There we are. Add a little contrast overall that way. And I'm going to take my control points and I'm going to start placing the points on the objects that we want to affect. So I place the control point on that upper right corner. Each adjustment tool or each control point has brightness, contrast, saturation, structure, and so on. So let's go ahead and start controlling that. I'm going to reduce the saturation just a touch in those clouds. If I go too far, it looks really weird. Clouds should have a tinge of color to them, whether it's blue and cool or it's warm because of a sunset or sunrise or anything. But in this case, I'm going to desaturate that because I'm going to take a control point in my lower left corner. I'm going to increase the warmth and increase a little bit of saturation. And then this is going to be sort of like a direct relationship between that upper left and lower left and upper right portion of the image. Too much warmth at this point. So let's just increase a little bit. I'm going to option click and drag and duplicate this point over into the center. I like what's happening here. Now there's those opposing forces with the warmth and the neutral. Let's take a control point in the upper left corner. Now, mind you, the size of the area of influence is going to affect the adjustment that you're making. Like if I go into the brightness adjustments and I darken this down by 13% or so, if I then expand this out, you can see the control point wants to take control of other stuff. Basically the things that are within that area, the area of influence, it's called inside of the circle, and it's going to basically look for those similar tones and colors and textures. So you do want to be careful with the size of the area of influence. And in this case, as I drop the control point on the sky, I can basically expand this thing around the entire upper left corner and it's going to be fine. I think I'm actually adjusting a little bit into the shadow area the grass or of the fields there and the rolling hills. If I take this down, we can actually get a good feel for that. Yeah, so you can see I'm actually affecting all of this area here. I don't want this control point to affect this area, so we take a new control point, place it in this area, and basically now this point recognizes that it should be affecting those similar tones and colors and textures. This sky point that we dropped, I was burning that corner down way too much, darkening down way too much, and I didn't want to. I just wanted to show you the effect of that control point. So I'll go back in and kind of massage that. So each point that we drop, we're going to be able to control those individual areas. I just want to drop one more control point into this lower right corner. I'm going to darken down the shadow adjustments, add a little bit of structure, and I'm actually going to brighten that lower right corner up just a touch, just because the light looks like it probably should work that way. And now we have an image that has a lot more pop to it, a lot more depth and form, and we've done almost all of our controls anyways have been selective, right? So we've sort of just picked the areas that we wanted to direct the viewer's attention to and distract them away from, and then added those points in. Again, making relatively subtle adjustments to each control point, but it's sort of the sum of all points, if you will, that allows us to go from our relatively flat linear looking image to something that is much more refined with a lot more pop and texture. I'm going to click that OK button in the lower right corner. That's going to bring us back over into Photoshop. We've got our final image. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to jump over into PhotoLab here and talk about using the Nik plugins from PhotoLab 2. And I also just want to point out the fact that if I'm in PhotoLab 2, I haven't found a good use for Viveza 2 when launching from PhotoLab 2, and that's because control points, U-point technology, has actually been integrated into this software. And the reason why that's so cool, first of all, it's nice because now I don't have to leave this interface. It can just access that stuff. But the reason why it's so very cool is that PhotoLab 2 is a parametric image editing tool. And basically that allows us to deal with our raw data, our raw files, in a non-destructive manner. And now with PhotoLab 2, you can use control points. A couple more things sort of in the new release, the Nik Software 2 by DxO, just so that I mention these things. There are 40 presets that I developed a couple months back, and those have been integrated into Silver Effects Pro 2, Color Effects Pro, Analog Effects Pro, and HDR Effects. So there are brand new presets that are built directly into the software. And then you've got support for high DPI displays on PCs. So if you're on a PC and you have a 4K screen, the experience you're going to have is a lot better because the interface is now malleable to that kind of control. So that's a nice little feature. And then the reason why I wanted to bring us back or over into PhotoLab 2 is because we have this U-point technology built into PhotoLabs 2. Which is, of course, DxO's proprietary raw processing software. Now, I just want to warm this image up a little bit and crop the photo before I show you the control points. The software, the interface here is slightly different than other pieces of software, but almost the same at the same time somehow, meaning it's really pretty straightforward in terms of learning how to use PhotoLab 2. You know, the crop tool works in a relatively straightforward way. Your white balance and all of your tools are accessible on the right side of the interface here. If there's anybody who shoots infrared photography, digital infrared photography, I have switched my entire infrared workflow over into PhotoLab 2 because the white balance capability is much better here for infrared photography than it is within my standard workflow, which was dealing with Lightroom and launching or post-processing using Lightroom. So my entire infrared workflow has switched in the past 6 weeks just because of that one white balance tool, let alone something like DxO Smart Lighting. But that's not what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is selective post-processing on the raw files using control points. So I'm going to click into the local adjustments tool here in the upper right corner. And then basically the default at this point is control points. But there are a whole bunch of different local adjustment tools that you can use. If you right click on the image, you'll see a little heads up display pop up, which is this little guy. And you have control point capability. There's an auto mask, which is an edge detection brush capability. You have an eraser tool if you want to get rid of the effect from an area that you've adjusted locally. New mask, reset, a brush function, and then also a gradient filter. And what we're doing here is adding all of these kinds of controls, including control points, to our workflow, and we're dealing with the raw information. That's the key. So the control point here, if I go and drop the point on his suit here, geez, I'm at a loss for words today. So this would be a little bit dark for my taste here, and I want to brighten it up. So in the initial adjustments, you've got light, you've got color, and you've got sharpening or detail adjustments. And in the light section, you have exposure, contrast, micro contrast, clear view plus, which is an algorithm that's proprietary to the DxO software, highlights, midtones, shadows, and then a blacks adjustment. Right, and you can control all of these aspects. Let's say like the brightness and maybe a little bit of contrast. And the beauty of it is now we're dealing with the raw data. That is the coup de grace. I guess it's the best part that I can talk about here. And the color, you have controls just like within Viveza. And I guess the reason why I'm showing you this is because if you're going to use PhotoLab, I don't know of a use of Viveza 2 if you're using PhotoLab with this raw data. You don't need it because this will allow you to control that. And so if I want to add a new control point and maybe brighten up the highlight on our bride here, I can go into the lightness adjustment. I can start brightening that up. I can go and maybe go into saturation and start to desaturate her skin tone since I've brightened that up and it looked a little bit funky in terms of color. And literally just go and drop points on the areas that you want to control. So my upper left or upper right corner, I'm going to darken that down. I'm going to desaturate that just a little bit as well. New mask, do the same thing in the lower left corner, darken that down. There we are. And again, what we're doing is we're sort of attracting the viewer's attention towards our couple in this case. When we're done editing there, I would click the close button and that would finish off our localized adjustments here with PhotoLab 2. Now, because I feel like I need to do that, I'm going to open up Viveza 2 from PhotoLab 2. You'll notice the interface looks exactly the same, but again, I don't know why I would even use Viveza 2 if I'm launching from PhotoLab 2 because I have this more powerful capability of just using control points in this interface. So for the sake of showing you, I'm on this next image. I'm going to click on the Nik Collection button that's in the lower right corner of the Customize section. This is going to lay out our Nik Collection in alphabetical order. I'm just going to go ahead and click on Viveza 2. What's going to happen is the process is almost the same as if you're in Lightroom. The raw file is going to be sort of set aside and duplicated, and we're going to get a TIFF file that we'll be processing within Viveza 2. So we'll end up with two files here within our interface, our raw interface. But what you'll notice is that the software looks exactly the same as before. I'm going to minimize my GoToWebinar control panel, and it works and operates exactly the same way. So we can drop a point. I want to make this a really dramatic image. So I'm going to darken down these shadows that are on the inside of the structure, expand this out a little bit, and then maybe add a little bit of contrast. So another great shortcut that I didn't mention yet, rather than having to move into the upper right corner and clicking the add control point every time, I use the shortcut Shift Command A. So that's Shift Command A on a Mac or Shift Control A if you're on a PC. That gives you a crosshair so that you can add in a new control point very quickly and easily. Add some contrast, a little bit of saturation in there. There we go. That's actually, watch this, as I add saturation, it looks a little bit cool, bluish in there. So I'm going to remove a little bit of blue and I'm going to remove a little bit of green. Oops, wrong way. And that's going to warm that back up in there. And of course, I can just kind of go around the image and distract you from the things I don't want you to look at, and increase the color and saturation in the areas that I do want you to look, and so on and so forth. And this is going to create an image that has hopefully more impact. Might drop a point in this shadow area. Watch what happens as I darken down just that shadow. Now I've got this really kind of eerie look and feel throughout the whole photo. Darken down that corner, remove a little bit of saturation in the corner. Let's look at the before and after. There's the original. There's the enhanced, and this is like a general workflow that we've dealt with. So we've looked at the interface, we've talked a boatload about control points, a little bit about levels and curves, and we've covered basically everything that's within Viveza 2. And then it jumps back over into our PhotoLab 2. And this is going to be a similar process for anyone who's a Lightroom user. In your film strip at the bottom of the screen, you'll have the original image, and then right next to it, of course, this is dependent upon the settings that you've chosen within your raw processor, but by default, the duplicated image will be right next to the original raw file. And it should be housed in the same folder physically as well. So it's easy to find outside of the raw processing software. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's about everything I wanted to get into with Viveza 2. So we're going to transition into a Q&A. I do want to just mention that until the end of June, it is basically $50 off of the going price. So you can pick up the Nik Collection 2 by DxO for $99.99 USD, as opposed to the $149.95, which I believe is the normal full price. All right, so I'm going to jump back into my GoToWebinar control panel, and I'm going to see if there are any questions here. Is there a link to a Color Effects Pro webinar? Donald, hopefully you're still here. I believe there are, well, there might not be. Oh, here are a few of my favorite photographers, Rodney Lowe. Both of them happen to be Rodney's, Rodney Smith and Rodney Lowe. If there isn't any more Color Effects webinars this month, Donald, but next month, I'll tell you what, I haven't actually created, or I haven't created my list that I will send to DxO, and then they will approve as long as they like it. But Donald, I will start out July with a Color Effects Pro webinar. And my webinars have been Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm on the East Coast, and I start them at either 11:30 in the morning or 7 o'clock at night. But the first webinar of July, how about I make it a Color Effects Pro webinar? And then we can end July with a Color Effects Pro webinar as well. So there are none as of right now, but that's because we already ran the Color Effects webinar for this month. Do you plan to explain how the Nik Collection works with Affinity Pro? I don't have Lightroom or Photoshop. Omar, I actually am not familiar with Affinity Photo. I'm going to have to look that one up. I'm assuming that is another post-processing photo tool. I mean, it definitely sounds like it. It sounds familiar, but I've never used it. Omar, if Affinity Pro takes plugins the same way that Photoshop does, it likely will work. But I don't have enough experience with, considering it just barely rings a bell, the name of that software. So I don't know. But Omar, if you don't have Lightroom or Photoshop, you actually get PhotoLab 2 Essentials for free when you purchase the Nik Collection from DxO, which is really pretty great. So Maureen, you said you bought and downloaded PhotoLab 2, but the new menu isn't showing. So Maureen, you might have the one previous version back. So what you might need to do is update the software. And so you would do that by going to the DxO website, logging in, and then you should be able to update your software. And if that should just work, as far as I know. Hi, Rafael. Rafael joining from Mexico. Cool. I was going to do a big shot photograph in Mexico City, at a large museum. I think it's called the Sumia I can't recall the exact name of it. It's a great big beautiful structure right in right in Mexico City, but we weren't able to pull that off. Basically, this big shot project that I work on is where we invite hundreds or a few thousand people to make a photograph at night where we paint with light to illuminate the building. The next one that we're going to do, the next big shot that we're going to be running, will be in Albany, the New York State Albany State Capitol building, sometime next April. And if you're not familiar, you want to check that out. It's a really cool project that we run at RIT. It's called the RIT Big Shot. Check it out. All right. So the next question here. Need a stronger explanation of structure. By the way, also PhotoLab 2 Elite. So Donald, I'm not following the second part of your question, but to explain structure, let's go into this photo. I'm going to delete the layer that we just made, and let's jump back over into Viveza 2. I'll walk you through structure a little bit more. So structure is a contrast/texture adjustment tool. I'm going to double click to zoom into 100%, just so we can kind of get a better feel for what this tool is doing. And the structure slider, if I increase the structure, what's happening is I can relate it kind of, shoot, what's the tool in Adobe Camera Raw? Wow, I am at a complete and total loss for terms right now. So there's a tool in Photoshop that is escaping me right now, and it's ridiculous that it is because it's such a common tool in Adobe Camera Raw. Clarity. Goodness, I couldn't remember the word clarity for some reason. So I will relate the structure tool that's built into Color Effects Pro to the clarity function in Adobe Camera Raw. The difference, though, is that it's not just mid-tone contrast. If I drop this control point and I start adding structure, the Nik Collection, when you open the software, what it does is it figures out all the different objects and areas in the image. So when you start placing the control points, it can make those smart selections. And what structure wants to do is add or increase the little kind of like micro contrast texture in the photo or wherever you're placing that point. So if you decrease structure, it's going to decrease that texture. If you increase the structure, you're going to get more of that kind of textured adjustment. Now, the beauty of this, of course, is that texture is usually driven by quality and direction of light. And the structure tool kind of throws that out the door and allows us to take something that has, indirect sunlight on it. So this is just open shadow here, and we can increase that texture. So again, it's another way of directing the viewer's attention to these things that are important or maybe not so important by increasing texture in the areas that do want it and decreasing texture in the areas where you don't want it. Cool. So Donald, wonder if the circle could be applied to affect change of the whole sky. Yes, so if you place the control point and increase the entire area to encompass an entire, let's say, sky, the selection of the control point is going to look for that blue or that tone, color, and texture that you've increased the point around. Donald, let me know if I've sort of filled in what control points are doing, because I went back to those questions that it looks like you asked at the beginning of the webinar, and I'm not sure if, throughout the rest of the webinar I've explained that what you were looking for. Oh, good question. So Michael said when you show the mask of a control point, I see banding. So you see those little like step chart, like there's hard edged lines is what he's talking about. And is that in the actual mask, or is it a display that's not very accurate? Michael, it could be both of those things. So it's going to be image dependent. The first image that we looked at was an 8-bit JPEG, and there wasn't a lot of information in there, and we were adding a lot of contrast. And so what could be happening is there was banding in that image as we were adding contrast, and the control point picked up on that. But if you're dealing with a high quality, this is I know it's a 16-bit, pretty sure it was a TIFF file, you're gonna get nice clean selections, because there's going to be plenty of data for these control points to work with. In fact, to kind of just drive that one home, if you're going to be doing extensive post-processing on any image, but especially with the Nik plugins, I recommend using a 16-bit per channel image, unless you're doing HDR, and then it's 32-bit per channel. But I recommend working with a 16-bit per channel image. The control points are going to be more powerful and smarter, and then also the end result is going to be much cleaner, whether you're sending your image off for web viewing or if you're printing it or whatever you're doing. And I think that the problem was it was a JPEG that we were dealing with, or an 8-bit per channel file anyways. Great question. Okay, so we answered that one. Is there a list of shortcuts for Viveza? Betty, no, I don't think that there's an official list for any of shortcuts with the Nik plugins. Back around 2011, there was actually a PDF that you could download, but I don't think that that exists anymore. I bet you if you went searching through Reddit or something like that, you'd find a list. But I guess I should make like an unofficial list. I don't know all of them, but I do know most of them. At least I think I know most of them. It'd be cool to learn other ones as well. But Wendy asked, can you control the overall opacity of the control point? Well, you can't control the opacity of the control point in the way that it's making its selection, Wendy, but you can control the opacity in so much of the adjustments that you're making, right? So brightness at 0 is 0% opacity. You're not affecting it. But as you increase or decrease the adjustment, it's going to be increasing the strength of it. But Wendy, in the software, you can't really affect the opacity of the point. All you can do is add more control points, and that's going to kind of control, what's being affected and what's not, right? As I place this point, I start dragging it around, you can see how they start to interact with each other. The first point, this control point is this is the one that we're looking at the selection of. And as I move this control point around, you can see as the live selection changes. Juris, when decreasing brightness in the tool, it seems to change the color, like the dodge burn tool that was in Photoshop back in the day. Are there any suggestions as to how to compensate for that? Yes, good question, Juris. So as you make a luminosity adjustment, let's say with Viveza 2's brightness, what you're going to want to do is go in and control color. So the drawback of that old tool within Photoshop was that it didn't give you a color adjustment tool like in the same thing, right? When you would dodge or burn with the old Photoshop dodge burn tool, it did not so nice things to the color. This has a similar initial adjustment, but because you can control all aspects of color with each point, it's not such a big deal. And in fact, I kind of prefer that it gives us this kind of control because now I can go in and adjust blue or green. And if it were automatic, I wouldn't have as much control to be able to adjust that with. Hopefully that helps. How do you increase or decrease the circle describing the area being affected? You do that by changing the area itself. So the slider that's parallel to the control point, hopefully there are no mathematicians in here saying that a point can't be parallel. Anyways, if you drag that control point slider left or right, you drag it away from the point, it's going to get bigger, it's going to make a larger selection. Drag it towards the actual point, it's going to make a smaller selection. So Donald, you say, so using the Nik plugins inside PhotoLab 2, is that destructive or non-destructive when used inside a program DxO PhotoLab? Oh man, Donald, I don't want to get this question wrong, so I'm going to interpret it this way. So you're saying if I'm using the Nik plugins with PhotoLab 2, is it destructive or is it not? So if you're the Nik plugins with any contemporary RAW processor is technically non-destructive in so much as you can always go back to the original RAW file. If you're in Lightroom and you're dealing with your RAW information and you open up into Viveza 2 from Lightroom, a duplicate image is made. So we're working in a non-destructive workflow in so much as you can go back to the original RAW file, right? Once you've made your adjustments to that duplicated TIFF file, those things are kind of saved and set in stone. You can't go back with that TIFF file. You can only start over again with the RAW file. the beauty of using the control points that are built into PhotoLab 2 is that it is completely a non-destructive process, because you can always go back and get rid of or adjust those control points on the raw information. And that's why I'm gravitating so quickly towards PhotoLab 2, is that I use these control points in Viewpoint technology every single day that I'm editing photos. And now I can use them on my raw data. It's unbelievable. It's really pretty nice. So Roman, you said, I know it's a niche topic, but I'm just getting started with infrared, so I'd really enjoy a session on how to process infrared. Roman, that's a cool one. I'll float that to the DxO folk. So the problem that I would see is that it is very niche, and we would probably only get a very low turnout for people interested in infrared. Doesn't mean we can't do it, and it might be fun to just do one, and then it gets recorded, and then people can check it out afterwards as well. So Roman, I'll float that one. Andy, you said great idea to DxO Lab, the Nik Collection. Viveza, why showing this if there's no reason to use Viveza? Oh, so Andy, I know I've lost a bunch of people. Thank you for sticking around for the Q&A, by the way, everyone. I'm trying to just make my way through all of the questions. So I'm way up there. This question was asked earlier. So why would you use Viveza 2 if you're processing your files from PhotoLab 2? I don't think I would. I wouldn't use Viveza 2 if I'm in PhotoLab 2, because I have that capability, but with the raw data. I would use the rest of the plugins like Color Effects Pro 4 from PhotoLab 2 after I've done my, overall light and color adjustment in PhotoLab 2 and my raw processing. But why am I showing it? It's because I just thought I should show you how to launch the software from PhotoLab 2, whether you're going to use it Viveza 2 or not. I mean, I just wanted to show you how to access it. Good question, though. Very valid. Like, why the heck would I do it if I wouldn't even use it? Well, because I would use the rest of the Nik plugins, and you do access the software that way. Are the Nik 2 plugins still useful in PhotoLab 2? Oh, for sure. Yes. So I'm going to cancel here. Let's jump over into PhotoLab 2. So in PhotoLab 2, I'm finding myself using everything except for Viveza 2, because the software has control points built directly into it. So what I would do is, like on this image, I would crop the photo, I would adjust my white balance, make sure my optical correction is on, place my control points where I wanted to dodge and burn, and then from there, I might convert this image to black and white. So from there, I would go into the Nik Collection, click on Silver Effects Pro 2, and then, okay. And then I would convert this image from color to black and white. So in this way, now I can basically deal with one raw processing software that has control point capability, Viewpoint technology, and also the rest of the Nik plugins. Maybe I'll go into my En Vogue presets. These are the 10 presets that I developed of the past few months, and they have this really nice result. They're Mind you, I've jumped over into Silver Effects Pro 2. Sorry if I created any confusion if anyone walked away. And I'm converting this file from color to black and white. These are the 10 presets that are now built into Silver Effects Pro 2 called En Vogue. And it's a really fun set of presets that look different than the original 38 presets that were built in. So let's say I like more silver, but I want to go into brightness. Let's darken down the brightness a little bit with dynamic brightness, reduce some contrast, and darken the whole thing, and then say, okay, I'm happy with that. Click the save button, and now that's more of the kind of normal workflow that I would be dealing with PhotoLab 2. That is, doing the raw processing. I don't know why my computer's doing that. I would be doing the raw processing in PhotoLab 2, and then using something like Color Effects Pro or Silver Effects to massage the image. All right, how can I copy viewpoints in PhotoLab? Felix, as far as I know, the control points in PhotoLab can be copied basically the same way. Let's look. So I jumped into my local adjustments. I've got my control point. If I want to copy that one, if I hold, nope, Option doesn't do it. If I click on it and then I hit Command C, Command V, that isn't doing it either. Good question. So I've got my point. I'm going to right click. That doesn't do me any good. You know, there must be a way of duplicating these control points. I know if I want to get the exact same effect like in his hair, I can place that here, and this control point is going to be a duplicate of this point, basically just by clicking somewhere, but it acts entirely as a duplicate, meaning I can't make adjustments to this point. I have to basically make a new control point if I wanted to do something different than an exact duplicate. But the way that you make a duplicate that stays exactly the same is you literally just click on the point that you want a duplicate of, and then you click somewhere else, and it's going to make a duplicated control point set of adjustments, except with its new selection based upon that area of influence. Let me know if that made sense. That was probably a weird explanation. Will Nik 2 work with TIFF files? Yes, absolutely. The TIFF files shouldn't have any problem. Walter, any chance of extending capability back to OS 10.11 El Capitan? I don't know. Walter, that's a good question. I don't, as far as I know, most software companies, don't actively make things backwards compatible. If the software existed in that era and in that operating system, usually it will continue to work in that operating system. But Walter, I can't say that for sure because I don't actually work for DxO. I conduct these webinars to train on the Nik plugins. So I don't have a good answer for that one, and I do apologize. That one, you're better off reaching out to DxO and asking about that. Which I know it feels like you are by asking in this webinar, but I'm actually a professor of photography, and I do the webinars as a service to DxO and the public, and because I like talking about the software. It's a fun time. Can Adobe Camera Raw read changes done in DxO PhotoLab? That's a good question as well. I do know that DxO PhotoLabs 2 makes a sidecar XMP file. I don't know how much of that XMP file Adobe Camera Raw can read. So I had a question about the recordings. The recording of this webinar, which we're still recording this, so you're going to hear this part if you stick around to the very end of that, will be emailed to you based upon the email address that you signed up for the webinar. So as long as you signed up with a real email address, it'll get emailed to you tomorrow after 24 hours, I believe. Mark, could you send links to other video trainings on other products? Tell me the agenda for other webinars. So Mark, next month, I haven't actually planned the agenda. Right now, I'm thinking we start with a Color Effects Pro webinar. Maybe, I will absolutely float the idea, and maybe we can do an infrared photography, like post-processing webinar using, I would say, PhotoLab 2. And then also, I like to use Color Effects and Silver Effects Pro and Sharpener Pro with my infrared images as well, oddly enough. But there's no, and if you're interested in other videos, go to YouTube. And if you literally just search on YouTube, Nik Collection, there is an official DxO Nik Collection page, and you've got like hours and hours and hours of old webinars, of old videos, and of stuff that Brian Matish would have recorded, or me, or Lori Rubin, or all of the old Nik Software folk. They're all up there. Is there a chance to get much better price of the Nik Collection? I've been using them since a long time, and we only need to update. Raphael, good question. I believe that the option is to kind of re-up at $99.99. That's another one that's sort of like out of my realm at this point. I do know that the deal that you can get now, so it's normally going to be $150 until the end of June because of its launch pricing, is $99.99. I don't know much else aside from that. I'm sorry, Raphael. Thank you, Omar. Will there be a PhotoLab 2 webinar showing the difference between essential and full version? I'm interested in prime noise reduction feature and want to know the superior Lightroom. Good question as well, Michael. I'm not currently conducting webinars on PhotoLab 2. I would be hesitant to do that because I don't know every single in and out. I do know, if you want to know the differences between Essentials and the Elite version, there's actually a document. And if you literally go to Google and say, what is the difference between PhotoLab 2 Essentials and Elite, a document will basically pop up. You'll have to go to the FAQs page, but an FAQ page will pop up with that information specifically. Can you access Nik through Affinity and add it manually? Yeah, Stefan, I'm not sure. Yes, Museo Sumia. I'm probably saying that wrong, Raphael, but that was the museum that we were going to do an RIT big shot of. That would have been really fun. It's a beautiful building, and it would have been cool. We would have basically had to light the neighboring buildings to illuminate the museum itself. Would have been really neat. Is clipping warning built into Viveza? No, Felix, there is no clipping warning built into Viveza 2. That feature in the Nik plugins wasn't integrated until, I believe, HDR Effects Pro and on. So HDR Effects Pro, Color Effects, Silver Effects, and Analog Effects Pro all have clipping warnings, but I don't believe Viveza has it. Michael, thank you. You mentioned clarity. See, I'm just now getting to those comments. Stefan just said, update for $59.99, sign into the DxO account for this. Good, okay, so I can't remember who asked, but if you have an old version of the Nik plugins and it's registered, it looks as though you can sign into DxO's account and then update for $59.99. I'm getting this from another probably very valid source. Stephen, thank you for mentioning that. But I can't say that that's an official thing because I'm not entirely sure. Thank you. How do you find future webinars, such as the Color Effects Pro webinar that I just mentioned? Those are going to be posted in the next few weeks. I have to send DxO my proposed list, and then DxO will basically post those as soon as they've okayed all of them. How do I get the start of the Nik collection to come up in the Photoshop startup? Jerry, good question. Let me minimize DxO here. So if this Nik selective tool isn't popping up, Jerry, what you would do is go to the File drop-down menu, go to Automate, and then under Automate, you click on the Nik Collection selective tool, and that's going to populate the Nik Collection selective tool. Click on that, pops up, voila. If you've edited a file in Adobe RAW and then opened the file into PhotoLab 2, am I starting with an edited file from Adobe RAW? Another valid question. Douglas, as far as I know, you're going to be starting over with the PhotoLab 2. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm pretty sure that the XMP file that Adobe RAW writes is not going to be read by PhotoLab 2. Maybe somebody who's more versed in that can tell you though. I haven't tried that yet because what I've been doing is taking files that I haven't actually been processing with Adobe Camera Raw and bringing them into PhotoLab. So I haven't looked for that at this point, if that makes sense. Is the control point a preferred tool over the adjustment brush? Maureen, I much prefer it, but that is completely subjective, totally subjective as to what kind of controls you like to work with. Some people much prefer just a brush, but there is the edge detection brush, there's a gradient tool, and there's the control points that are built into PhotoLab too. And I find myself using all of them. I tend to think with control points first, and then I will move into gradients, and then I will clean things up using brushes. That tends to be my process. Are past webinars online? Yes, David, all of the webinars that we've done are not online. We used to actually do 3 webinars a day, 5 days a week. That would be way too many webinars to have to go through. But there are numerous webinars that you can watch on YouTube. Is there a way you can come down and present PhotoLab 2 to my photography club? Oh, well, Donald, maybe. I'd love to. I do visit photography clubs around Western New York. I go to Buffalo and to Canandaigua. I've been to Vermont a couple times since moving back to New York. I used to do it all over the country, but that was when Nik would pay to do that. Donald, where is your photo club? And Mark, you said I need to go. Could you email me? Okay. Mark, I'm not going to be able to email you that, but basically all of this information is available. And you will get an email. I think, Mark, you might have already left, but you will get an email tomorrow with this information, with the new, sorry, with this webinar recorded. I should say it that way. Notice, answer, and increase, decrease. Have you been working images? Robert, I'm not sure of the question there. I'm sorry. PhotoLab 2 only interact with Lightroom. No, Betty, you can use PhotoLab 2 as a total standalone piece of software, raw processing tool, and image sort of organization tool, and then you can also match that and play with Photoshop, right? So I actually do send images from PhotoLab 2 over into Photoshop so that I can use layers and layer masks when necessary. Good question. Boy, we got a lot of good questions today. Nik shortcuts. Kevin. So Kevin found a link to this page here. Let me see if I can send this out to everybody. I'm going to open up a Chrome. Cool. There it is. Kevin, thank you so much. I'm going to send this link out to everybody, and I'm going to send it to, so this should show up in everybody's questions box there. That link brings you to the Nik Collection shortcuts page. Kevin, great work. Thank you. Okay, cool. Hey, Mike. Good to see you. Mike, that's great. Mike is also interested in an infrared webinar. All right. We've got 2 so far. We got that. Kevin, thank you for posting that. Another spot, just in another spot for the new control point. Some of the comments I'm not following completely. It was probably referencing old questions, and so I've already lost the context. Cool. All right. Go to meeting. Excellent today. Got it. Thanks, Marvin. Go IR. We got 3 people interested in the infrared talk. Cool. All right. Gerald, you said Affinity Pro plugin. Okay, so let me send this out to everybody as well, because apparently you can use the Nik Collection in Affinity Pro. So that'll send to everybody. So there are 2 links in your questions box. If you're an Affinity user, use the second one. If you want to get the keyboard shortcuts, use the first one. So Roman, you said one more IR question. Have you shot IR in places like Iceland and Greenland or Arctic locations? Roman, I have not. That would be, there are 2 photographers who I can think of. Wow, and one of them already escapes me. Vincent Versace is one. So if you look up Vincent Versace photography, he's a Nikon ambassador, and he shoots infrared all around the world. And so if you have specific questions about that, you can probably contact him through his website, Vincent Versace. And then, shoot, there's another photographer who's, I can't remember his name, but he posts on Facebook all the time with his infrared images. I just can't remember who that is. Cool. Donald, you're in Peekskill. Donald, is that near Albany? I don't know Peekskill, but I know there's a lot of, kills around the Albany area, around the central New York. And Blair made a good point here. Before you update the software, make sure that you back up your presets. So copy all presets that you've created, your custom presets, save them somewhere on your computer, and then when you update it, you don't run the risk of losing them. Cool. Mike, I would love to join the Twin Cities photo club there for another night. That would be great. Infrared too. Wow, I got a lot of people who are interested in that. Rick is also interested in the infrared webinar. Wait, yeah, look at this. Everybody's interested. This is wonderful. Cool. Well, this gives me an excuse to go out and shoot more infrared work as well. You're about a half an hour from Albany, near West Point. Donald, actually, West Point is another place where we would absolutely love to do an RIT big shot. I can imagine a couple different views because those are really beautiful, interesting buildings, and you can layer some cool architectural work there. Yeah, Donald, we should chat about that. Donald, in fact, my RIT email address, if you're interested in emailing me, I don't have questions, or I don't have answers for every single thing, mind you, but I'll gladly try and answer any questions you might have. If you guys want to email me DAHPPH, so it's DAHPPH at rit.edu. I would love to come and see you guys in the Camera Club and do a talk for it. That sounds really fun. And if you have questions in regards to other things, no problem. I'll try and answer those as well. Tony, no problem. Thank you very much. I'm glad you joined us today. I don't see any more. Oh, yep. Ray said, can you show the gradient tool? Yep. Let me show you how the gradient tool works within PhotoLab here. Markham, thank you for joining. I'm glad that that was helpful and useful and a good time. Okay, so the gradient tool within PhotoLab. I got to minimize my GoToWebinar panel here. So let's see. Let's go to an image where maybe I would use that. Let's show this one. So here we've got another photo. There's all sorts of things that we would do to this image to make it pop, to bring out texture, to well, make it so that we could see the rainbows here. But what we might want to do is add a gradient, maybe from the upper right corner, to see if we can get a little bit of texture out of that area. So I'll right-click. Mind you, we're in PhotoLab 2. I'm in my Customize section, and I've clicked on Local Adjustments. So just so you know, you got to click on Local Adjustments first. Right-click, go to the Gradient Filter, and then you literally just like a gradient filter, let's say within Lightroom, click and drag out the adjustment area that you want to control. And then you can go into your exposure, right? Or into, let's say, the Clear View Plus, and into micro contrast, and all of the different controls that you have. And we can really start to hone in. This is not the best example. Add a little bit of contrast. Let's go into color. You know, what would happen if we went into sharpness? So now we're getting a little bit more texture out of that area using this gradient tool. If we ever needed to adjust the gradient tool, we would just go to one of the points or pins, and we can go in and you know, adjust the shape, the tilt and gradient of the actual tool itself. It works in a very similar way to the Lightroom gradient tool, if you're familiar with that one. Can one group control points in PhotoLab? David, that's a good question. I'm not sure on that one. Let's see. I mean, there might be a way, and I might not be able to just figure it out intuitively, but let's say we do a new mask. Wow, my computer's going crazy now. The fan just kicked on. Control point. Let's place one here. And then, well, actually, technically, David, these three control points are grouped, meaning like as soon as I drop the point, so here's what I did. Let's delete these points. Let's start over. Okay, so if I add a new control point and I just place it down here, if I make an adjustment, so let's brighten this up and add a little bit of clear view and a little bit of micro contrast and contrast. So let's say we like that effect. You can do a couple things. You can expand that area to the entire image, but that runs the risk of affecting areas that maybe we don't want to affect. The other option is to literally, when you're on your point, just click and drop the next point on the area that you want to adjust. And this will actually act as a duplicate / a group that if I adjust, I'm just going to add one here as well. If I adjust these sliders, it's going to affect all of those points. So you don't hit G or Command G to group them. They actually automatically work in a grouped functionality, David. And then if you don't want that to happen, you would just delete that control point and place a new mask point on the area that you want to adjust. All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've got way over on time here, about a half an hour. Greatly appreciate everybody sticking around during the Q&A. Hopefully you had a good time. Please come back and see us. Joseph Lanashke is running webinars till the end of the month, as well as July and August, and hopefully on past that. And I will be as well. I'm going to try and start July off with a color effects webinar, and I'm going to put a collection of images together and talk for infrared photography at some point. But there will be other webinars as well, Silver Effects, Analog Effects Pro, and so on and so forth. Ruben, if you want to rewatch this webinar, it's got to get processed, and then it will actually automatically get sent to your email address that you signed up to this webinar for. So you'll get an email, I think 24 hours from now. Thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen. Have a really great day, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.